Okay, this is lesson 10, and we're going to start out with the vocabulary for lesson 10. And one of the first words I want to talk about is gesture drawing. Gesture drawing is generally considered to be part of more or less figure drawing because gesture drawing is actually something that captures movement. But it can also be used in drawing one to be considered a quick idea sketch. Now, we talked about thumbnail sketches last time in lesson 9, and you could consider that similar to this. Now, I'm going to take that still life that's in your workbook from lesson 9, and I'm going to do a quick gesture drawing of one area out of that still life that's in the picture that's in your workbook. Now, gesture drawing actually can be more of a, part of your idea sketch. But what you're really trying to do is make a placement of things. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually looking off camera at part of that still life that's in your workbook. And all I'm doing is actually just blocking in, as we talked about, which is what you're doing in Project 3, but you're actually using charcoal. And so in here, of course, I'll be using pencil to do this. And let's see here, I just have a couple other things to block in. Now, gesture drawing is typically considered some idea sketch that's anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes. Sometimes people say, well, it's really only 2 minutes or less, but it can be anything that's fairly quick. Now, I only have one more thing to block in here. These are some of the striped fabric that's actually in the background in that particular still life. And we had a couple pieces went this way. Now, again, you see, so this kind of gestural drawing, as you notice, it has a lot of extra marks. It isn't very detailed. It's only supposed to be the spirit of what's going on here, whether or not these are circular objects or they're on a little bit of an angle. And I'm just looking, again, something I talked about last time, which was placement. Okay, so you'll revisit this word again, especially when you do figure drawing. But as you notice in your example in your book, there's more of a gestural quality to movement in the example on page 43. Generally, a still life, which doesn't have much movement to it, isn't going to have a whole lot of that kind of quality to it. So it's mostly about your ideas and your impression of a placement of an object. Okay, the next one is middle ground. Now, it seems like a pretty obvious term because you have foreground, middle ground, and background, and I'm going to use this same drawing to talk about that. And of course, you already did thumbnails, and I already talked about foreground and how to pick out an area, and you're already past that, and you're now working on other things with Project 3, but I did want to point out again what middle ground is. And this would be a foreground piece here, this cup, because it's in front of this mannequin here, this reclined mannequin. This is the mannequin's legs here. And I'm just going to kind of reinforce this middle ground here of these legs here and the rest of that pelvis area. Okay, so now you have middle ground here with these areas here. One way I guess we could define them is if we gave them a little shading, but I'll wait till I get to the second part here. Here you have a box back here, and you have some more styrofoam cups that are kind of stacked upside down, make some nice cylindrical drawing things that can be a little bit of a challenge. These are also middle ground pieces. Middle ground doesn't have to be just one part of the middle. You could consider this middle and this also middle, or one could be, this could be more middle foreground and middle background, Now what I'm going to do, this is the background back here. Now also this fabric which came down here, if you're looking at your book, it was a black and white striped fabric. And I'm just going to shade it in real quick here to kind of differentiate, because now you've got another set back here, and you say, well, maybe even this set could be considered a middle background. So you could end up with, I'm going to put another M on there. So you could end up with more than one middle ground. So instead of making it really simple for you, I just thought, well, I'll just add a couple more items in here. And then you have the background. Now you could, it depends on how you emphasize your drawings when you're doing compositions, which is what we're emphasizing in this section, that this type of separation, doesn't have any really simple solution, and it shouldn't. But in drawing one, you're just learning how to identify these areas. This black part could be the background. It could also be maybe just a way that you're using the light to emphasize the background, which in that case could be the fabric. See, so there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But again, I just wanted to kind of quickly illustrate that particular vocabulary term. And I'll just kind of isolate these a little more for you there. Okay, so the next vocabulary term we have is reflected light. Now, you're starting to work on this project 3, and what's going on in there is you're just trying to compose it, and you're working with charcoal, and that reflected light is just one offshoot of a lit still life, meaning it has light, and you're starting to look at the different ways that light interact with shadows. The next lesson 11 will emphasize that a lot more, but this is just one place where I felt it was probably an okay idea to kind of introduce reflected light just in a real basic way. Now, if I draw a rectilinear shape and I'll draw a cylindrical shape. Now, a light source, and that comes up in the next chapter about this vocabulary, but a light source, let's say coming from the upper left. Generally what happens in a regular planar or geometric shape like this, is that you're going to end up with a highlight surface and a shadow surface here and a shadow surface here. We talked about plane breaks last time. The plane break is right here and here, and the light hits that, and there's going to be a change from this to this. There also is a change from here to here. Generally, if the light is coming from here, this shadow shape would be darker. So this one should be, most of the time, somewhat darker than this one. Now, if the light was coming from this way, then this one might probably be darker than this one. Okay, now that's just one of the basics of light that we will talk about more in lesson 11 and 12. Okay, but right now we want to talk about reflected light. And reflected light is going with this basic one over here, which we are using. The light's just going to keep traveling down to here. And but it actually can radiate out from this source. And so what happens is the light's going to hit here on this white surface, and then depending on the angle it's at, it's going to bounce back. And it will bounce back like this. It could bounce back over here. And I'm going to start including this cylinder in that same thing. And so what happens is you're actually getting a secondary light source of reflected light. Now it depends on the color of the object and how it absorbs light, but this really can make a lot livelier drawing when you include reflected light and not just shade a shape in a flat way. And by flat I mean filling the whole shape in the same way. So now you'll see You see how this is darker right here on these two plane breaks than I made it here. I'll do the same thing over here. While still making this shape over on this side generally lighter than this one. They both contain a variation in the shadow. So, and that is the light coming back onto the object. Now, a round cylindrical shape, you know, what happens in a round cylindrical shape is the darkest area is going to be the area in the middle, because that's the area closest to you. Now, reflected light will end up being on the opposite side of the light source. And you could end up with some, maybe a little lighter, a little bit over here. So that the reflected light in this case is going to be in this area on the cylinder, which is opposite the light. And then it'll be on both of these panels or shapes, which are opposite the light. But generally, always the darkest areas are right next to the lightest areas. Okay, so now the next two vocabulary terms which are kind of intertwined that we want to talk about are texture. So we have two kinds of texture, and I'm going to grab a little thing here. One of them is called actual texture. And if you notice this drawing board that I'm working on, and it's very similar to your drawing board that you're using, it's very smooth. The back of that drawing board, and this is just another one flipped over, is very rough. And I can feel that texture. This isn't called an actual texture you can feel. Now in drawing and two-dimensional work, it's not that often that you would have an actual texture because you're drawing with a pencil or charcoal, and you really don't get any kind of three-dimensional surface quality to the material that you're drawing with. In painting you would, and in some other medium, especially sculpture, you would also get a very big range of texture, actual texture on the surface. But in drawing, what we do usually, so I'm going to show you one thing that's called a, I'm going to use the rough side here for a minute, which is called a rubbing, or a texture rubbing. So with the texture rubbing, and I'm going to generally do a like a shading from dark to light here. And what you can see on this rubbing is a textured surface, but that's considered a visual texture. And a visual texture just means it has no actual feeling to it, but it looks like it might have been rough. If I was to do it now on the smooth surface, you'll notice a difference here. And so the gestural change of what I drew appears different. So I have a couple other examples. This is a piece of corrugated cardboard where I peeled off the back. And, you know, your imagination about what you would want to use for a textured surface is fairly unlimited, you know. And I'm just showing you a couple examples of what those might look like as a visual texture or a texture rubbing. This is a piece of corduroy. And again, things like burlap would work really good, anything like that. And so you can see the different linear qualities in here, and then this checkerboard quality here. So again, those are called rubbings, but that's a visual texture. Now there's a couple other visual textures, and you'll be practicing some of those today in class. And one of those is, let's say, I guess the visual illusion of, let's say if I was to want to draw a boulder, for instance, or a rock. First of all, the first thing I want is I want some plane breaks in the rock. And then the next thing I'm going to do is draw in what I would consider different planes, and I'm just shading them different, just like I did in that last little demonstration you saw with the cube and the cylinder. Again, I have an imaginary light source maybe coming from the top, and so you see you have so what this is then is basically a one kind of visual texture by me drawing what I would consider, and I would say this is a stone or a rock, and it's just a pretty simple little thing, but I mean that's one example. Another one would be, let's take and draw, like, if you think of a basket, for instance, or a weaving of a basket. And this kind of visual texture is basically an illusion. Let's see, we'll get over on this side, and we'll just finish this up real quick here. And what you're learning about here is everything, depending on how much time you take with something, you can really make the illusion of something that looks very real. If you watch this, let's take shape here real quick. Let's see, where's this? So that was down in there. And you have something that you're going to be working on in class that's in this chapter that has to do with texture, and you'll be able to practice something like this. And actually there's something in there that's very similar to what I'm doing here, and I thought that this, if I would just show you how this works, that would probably be helpful.